Hello, my name is DDelafield, and I would like to present to you a short video presentation about William Forsythe, the American-born choreographer. First, I'd like to start with a quote that I came up with myself. Sometimes in history, it is only in hindsight that an individual is hailed as legendary. Hindsight is better than foresight. In the case of William, the choreographer, the designer, the inventor, foresight is better than hindsight. He was born in New York City. He studied the classical instruments, and then he also grew up in Florida, where he got his dance training, and his dance training started later in his life, actually, because children, usually start, but he started a little bit later in his teens. And his teachers were also coming from the New York City Ballet, so that's obviously a big influence. So I would like to speak about his style briefly. Some have said that he's heir to Balanchine, which he's pretty humble about. He is, in my opinion, post-neoclassical. His style is very dynamic and the flexibility is extreme. He uses synthesized electronic music a lot of the time. But as far as the heir to Balanchine is just a different man. He comes from the Vaganova Academy, and he went through Europe during World War II. So obviously there are many classical mannerisms from the Russian school that Balanchine was putting into place. Whereas Forsythe, he's an American, and he's starting from the material of Balanchine, so he's just expanding on what he's seen. So that's his style in a brief keyword, and that's my opinion. But I didn't write about that in the essay. I wanted to stay more on a timeline and objective in the written essay. Now I'd like to speak about my process for online research, and I will mention some of the sites that I sourced from. I decided to stay with well-founded, established organizations like universities and newspapers that are very well established. I'm just going to list those. The Guardian, which is a British newspaper. The Financial Times, it's also a British newspaper. The New York Times. The Dresden Frankfurt Dance Company, the Institute for Contemporary Art in Boston. I also sourced the radio station WBUR, which is a section of NPR, National Public Radio. In the United States, National Public Radio is one of the best. In my opinion, I like NPR because it stays unbiased, and you can find so many things about arts from them. Also, the University of New South Wales in Australia, in Sydney, Australia, and the University of Southern California. And also the Paris National Opera. So those are those sites that I sourced from. So going into William Forsythe as an international choreographer and a company director. So he has worked freelance and as a company director. And how it all got started was he he made the international leap by following his then wife, Eileen Brady, who was dancing for the Joffrey Ballet. And so he also got a job with the Joffrey Ballet, but it was in the junior company. But he was dancing for both junior company and the senior company of the Joffrey Ballet. And then they both moved to Stuttgart, Germany in 1973. And so then in the Stuttgart company, he was dancing, and he was noticed by the ballerina Marcia Hayday, and she noticed his works. Marcia Hayday, she is a ballerina in her own right, was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award from the Prix de Lausanne in Switzerland. She also has huge connections with Maurice Béjart and Kenneth Macmillan of the Royal Ballet, John Neumer of the Hamburg Ballet. And so all of those connections, you know, and then she sees William and is encouraging him to be a choreographer as well. So his talent gets noticed, and the Stuttgart Ballet, they appoint him as a resident choreographer at that time. And so then his first works, Irrlicht in 1976 and Dream of Galilee in 1978. And while he was resident choreographer there at Stuttgart Ballet, he also went and lent his works over to cities Munich, London, Basel, Berlin, Frankfurt am Main, Paris, New York, and San Francisco. So while he was based in Stuttgart, he was still freelancing around. And then he made his first full-length ballet called Orpheus in 1979. So he left the Stuttgart Ballet in 1980, and he was freelancing for 4 years, just going all around, freelancing at prestigious ballet companies, the Munich State Opera, the Netherlands Dance Theater, Frankfurt Ballet, Paris Opera Ballet. And then finally, in 1984, the Frankfurt Ballet appointed him director. And so then he was there, and while he was there, he was commissioned by Rudolf Nureyev, the famous Russian star who defected to the U.S. And became famous in the U.S. and then went to be director of the Paris Opera Ballet. So Rudolf Nureyev commissioned Forsythe to do a ballet called In the Middle, Somewhat Elevated, and the star was Sylvie Guillaume, the étoile ballerina, also a legendary woman in her own right. So In the Middle, Somewhat Elevated, that was a pivotal moment for Forsythe because he was already going everywhere and his ballets were in demand, but the fact that Nureyev and Sylvie Guillaume came together and did this work that it created a new phase, if you will, the popularity of the post-neoclassicism. So that's my opinion. I feel like that's what happened, but that's in the 1984. That's what happened, and then after 1984, Forsythe started to go more and more into modernism, and the Frankfurt Ballet Board wasn't too happy about that. They wanted to have a little more classics in their repertoire. So I think it was becoming a bit of a challenge. So Forsythe moved on. After 20 years in the Frankfurt Ballet, he created 9 notable works. They're still in circulation in ballet companies all over the world. But in 2005, Forsythe created his own company, still in Germany, based in Dresden and Frankfurt am Main, and it was a public-private sponsorship. And so when he created the Forsythe company, he had a smaller budget and he had smaller spaces. So in an interview in the Financial Times, Forsythe said that because of the smaller space and the smaller budget, he couldn't afford pointe shoes, and he had to do modern anyway because classical ballet is difficult in small spaces. So that outer happenings corresponded to what was happening inside. That's my opinion. So and when he had his own company, the Forsythe Company, he again made another 9 notable works that are still in circulation and recognized and in demand in companies all over the world. So after he left the Forsythe Company, it was taken over by another person, but Forsythe is still listed on the website as an associate artist. So after he left the Forsythe Company, it then became, it had another name, and now it's called the Dresden-Frankfurt Dance Company. So currently it's the Dresden-Frankfurt Dance Company, but originally it was Forsythe's company. And it's still very much working. So when Forsythe left, just to name a few of the companies that are requesting his ballets and who have his ballets in their repertoire, that's going to be the Mariinsky Ballet, St. Petersburg, Paris Opera, the Royal Ballet, the New York City Ballet, San Francisco Ballet, National Ballet of Canada, and the Semperopera Ballet in Dresden, just to name a few. But it's growing all the time. Like, you have to stay updated because more and more companies are wanting his works. So that's in a nutshell on that one. The other thing I'd like to discuss briefly is his creative genius. He's multi-talented. He does as an installation artist for museums, an inventor, a filmmaker. He created some interactive art installations called choreographic objects, and that's the term that he coined. Again, his exhibits are toured internationally. His exhibits have gone to the Paris Louvre, the Tate Modern in London, the Modern Museum of Art, MoMA, in New York City, just to name a few. In my essay, I highlighted the exhibit at the Boston Contemporary Art Institute because it housed much of the exhibits that are touring. And so I'll just show you that right now. So here you can see this is called the Matter of Fact exhibit, and it's much like the Olympics, very interactive. The person is asked to go across the room, not touching the floor, while using these rings that are strung from a metal contraption. But it looks like this lady's having a lot of fun. So that's just one of his exhibits. I'm going to briefly mention those by name. A volume, Antipodes, Off Wand, The Fact of Matter, City of Abstracts. Nowhere and Everywhere at the Same Time. Never Cease Nodding, Towards the Diagnostic Gaze, towards the diagnostic gaze. It's a duster. And he's asking you to hold it as still as possible. Differential room. So just listing, those are some, also black flags. Those are some of the choreographic objects that tour internationally. Next, I would like to speak about his improvisation technology, a tool for the dance analytical eye. It is an interactive computer installation giving a 4D experience and including over 100 video lectures of Forsythe demonstrating and discussing his motional theories. It's based much upon the Laban model, Rudolf Laban, and then he expands on the Laban model with his own theories. So, just to name a couple of the terms that he uses in that CD-ROM program. Extrusion and extension, speaking about lines. Extruding and collapsing points, so creating a line or collapsing it. Curves. So those are just a couple of terms that he uses in that. Reorganizing space and time, anatomical exercises. So this improvisation technology also has won awards, and it was made in collaboration with a man named Volkner Kuchelmeister, and they were working there at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. And it's gone through a couple of editions, and now when you look at this improvisational technology, it's geared specifically for professional dancers. And so the last edition was in 1999, but it's in use in universities all over the world as a tool for the analytical dance eye. And then after he made that, he also created another computer technology for dancers in 2009. And this time he collaborated with the Ohio State University Advanced Computing Center and for the Arts and Design and the Department of Dance. And this time it was called the Synchronous Objects for One Flat Thing, reproduced. And it contains organizational principles, much like the tool for the analytical dance eye, but it pertains specifically to choreography and how to implement other disciplines. So in listing all those, the museum, the choreographic objects, and why I listed those different names, because underpinning all of Forsythe's work, whether it's in dance or the museum pieces, he has a philosophical approach to everything. Like he wants to evoke in the audience a conscientious perspective for life. In the choreographic objects differential room, it says it's a bench and a chalkboard, And it says, walk 9 steps away from the bench, then, with your eyes closed, walk backwards and sit down. So it's almost like he's asking people to put them in a Zen state, a state of consciousness, to be very much just in the moment. So I feel like that's just over everything that he does, that type of philosophy. Lastly, I'd like to speak about him as an educator. Currently, he is on the faculty of the University of Southern California, but he's also an honorary fellow for the Laban Center for Movement and Dance in London, and he was awarded an honorary doctorate from the Juilliard School in New York City. He is invited from all over to do lectures and workshops. So hopefully you have enjoyed this short discussion about William Forsythe. His contributions to humanity are really immense. Just show. His signature style. This is from in the middle, somewhat elevated. It's an example. So you can see it's an expansion on Balanchine. The extreme dynamic lines and movements with flexibility. But he's also done some works where it's just on the stage, multimedia, some TV screens, a lot of acting, a lot of what seems maybe chaotic, but very modern type movements. So he's not just highly professional dances like that, but almost like drama theater type productions as well, and Kammer. So he's very well-rounded in that aspect. The awards and recognitions of his work from high-profile organizations and dance theaters, dance companies, museums, architectural houses, national governments, city governments, universities, and computer design industries. It's immense, and it can cover many pages of all the awards that he's won for all of these things. But he is a humble man. From what I've seen in interviews and from hearing him speak, he sounds very humble, and it sounds like his goal, he's very down to earth, and his goal is to educate humanity through the many dimensions of dance and movement. So I enjoyed researching him, and I know so much more than I could ever imagined any one person could do in their life. So it's very surprising. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that.